their attention to best practices elsewhere and how they can do better, how they can do better working together, or how can they be supported such that their plans, their budgets also align to national priorities, national planning. So in a way that they are de-risked. And then part of the function, for example, of the ministry still is that in our relationship with development partners to represent the federation so that we will communicate to all the tiers of government areas where we think they can capitalize upon and do better. But then to come to your question, and maybe you have already provided the answer, that the 36 states are, in a way, 36 countries put together, in terms of the fact that there are countries who have with smaller population than the smallest Nigerian state in terms of population. The same thing with land mass. The same. So you have a governmental unit that has responsibility defined by the Constitution, has its own budget, has its own areas of responsibility or areas. Therefore, the stage has been set for that state to be deliberate about what they will prioritize, given all the opportunities that, and many states are doing that. They have historically and contemporarily, many have done so and are doing so in different ways. But the key thing, I think the question should be, how do we encourage them to do more and quicker, especially in terms of what was presented. If you take our gross domestic product, the size of the informal sector, just formalizing the informal sector to the formal sector by many states represent a massive opportunity. The resource endowment, different states are different to the extent that there's no state without a number of opportunities, yes, prospects that with deliberateness that they can. So how do federal government stands ready to support any state in pursuing any growth opportunity in the state? Of course, there are areas which are still an issue, my legislation and the oil industry, as well as the solid mineral sector, where the licensing requires more collaboration than not, which is, again, these are things that with determination, many states are resolving with ease and doing better. And then the low-hanging fruit that has been cited, all Nigerian states, for example, are in some way able to compete or to generate more value from the agricultural sector with processing. All the 36 states, for example, all the 36 states of Nigeria, including FCT, including Lagos, surprisingly, they have the ability to produce rice profitably. They have the ability to produce cassava profitably. The southern states, mostly with smaller populations, with smaller land mass, can be comparable to Netherlands in terms of opportunity in the agricultural space, high value added products like vegetables, like eggs, so the spectrum is wide, and each state can do better. And I know that when we hear from maybe the governor, we can appreciate how much. Thank you. Great.
And we'll come back to you to maybe talk a little bit more about some specific initiatives. But let's go to the governor of Nasarawa. Your Excellency, can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you were thinking about new markets, developing new markets, attracting investments from your states? Are there particular sectors you're focused on, and what steps are you taking?
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies and Honorable Ministers. First, I will pick it up from where my senior colleague, the Honorable Minister, has dropped, where he's mentioning about every state has the opportunity, to go into one aspect of agriculture or the other. I will add, every state in the Federation also has one kind of minerals or the other today. That's what you have in Nigeria. For that reason, what do we need? I think the first is to commend Mr. President and the federal government for the two reforms that everybody has been mentioning since morning, unification of the FX and withdrawal of the subsidy. That has given opportunity and actually given opportunity to states now to compete for FDI. And just like my younger brother, the GMD of flour mills, actually said, when I say younger brother, I saw you look somehow, forget about the beers, I'm his elder brother. So, like he said, in reality, we should be going after FDI rather than FBI, because he knew exactly what he's saying. A lot of people come in with that intention, but in reality, they don't. But one thing that we need to do also is to focus on our areas of competitiveness. For us in Nasarawa, we know we're a state of agriculture. So we started by focusing in that area, and that's why the state government say we will take opportunity to say, one, we will directly go into agriculture and we will encourage PPP. So that's what we did. That's why today, flour mills is in Nasarawa State. Dangote has the biggest sugar plantation they have in Nasarawa State with 68,000 hectares of land. Olam has their biggest actually in Nasarawa State. So that's what we did in order to focus on that, not only on the big commercial, but also the smaller farmers. Now, going back to the mining, which we are called a state of solid minerals, so we started, and let me make this statement with due respect to so many other multinationals. I think Nigeria generally, and especially the subnationals, have to look at partners who are interested in Nigeria, not necessarily partners that we are interested in. Because I will give you an example. When they discovered lithium of the highest purity in Nasarawa State, I was invited to the Department of Trade in Washington, D.C., and they wanted to know more. So I briefed them about it. They said, we'll actually come back to you. The Chinese discovered actually that we do, so they invited me, and they received me well. So when they invited me, I was there, in Beijing, and I was able to brief them generally about what kind of lithium that we had. The first thing they did was to say that, all right, Mr. Governor, one thing that you need to do is that we need to encourage that anybody carrying out lithium mining in Nasarawa State should also be processing it in Nasarawa State. And I say, thank you very much. So immediately on my return, we came up with an executive order and say that even though, just like the minister has said, we are not the ones that give license for mining of lithium, that anybody doing lithium, mining lithium in Nasarawa State must also process in Nasarawa State. And with that came the birth of Avatar processing. Avatar today, as we sit, is the biggest lithium processing plant in Nigeria, which was commissioned by Mr. President last year. After we did that, then came another company. In fact, the day it was commissioned, one of the biggest investors, met with Mr. President, and after seeing the kind of reserve we have, made a commitment that he was going to build one. I'm happy to report to you that the one for 6,000 metric tons a day has already been completed, just waiting for Mr. President to come into commission. So that is the area of that. And it is very important that we as a government and as people and as investors, we must also come in to protect this kind of industries. That's why I gave the Vice President a standing ovation, when he mentioned everything he said about Dangote. I didn't do that just because I love what is happening with the Dangote industry, but I did that because we must do the same with Zenith Bank. If it is in trouble, we must protect it. GTB, we must protect it. MTN, we must protect it. Every one of these big investors, once they are in trouble, it is our responsibility to come in together and protect them. And that's the only way that we can move on. So as long as we can, nobody will take us serious. We can forget about going to all these international, everywhere, seeking for investors. If we cannot even protect our own local investors, how can we protect somebody coming from outside? So that's the reason why I say that. So I thank you very much. That's the way we are going. We pick area of our own competitiveness. We say, this is our own area. This is where we can compete. If you talk livestock, Nasara, we don't go into livestock because I know we don't have competitive advantage in that area. So we pick areas that we have, and then we focus on that, and that's the way we are going. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I want to skip ahead a bit, and we'll come back to the Commissioner of Finance from Kaduna. But I want to skip ahead a bit to Ms. Obianuju Uchenna. You are, I think, the acting director for the Tony Blair Institute, and I know that you are working with states in helping them to attract investment. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see in terms of best practices, lessons learned, what works, what doesn't, and then we can come back to some other concrete examples.
Thank you very much, and I'll stand on all existing protocols. So I think that what's most exciting about the work that we do at the Tony Blair Institute is that we are partnering with states here in Nigeria, states that are really serious about economic transformation in their states, who want to move from ambition to actual investment on the ground. And I'm very happy to hear that His Excellency, the Governor of Nasarawa State, actually mentioned some of the best practices and good lessons that we have seen. So I think first I'll start with what works. What works really is about picking a narrow focus as opposed to a very wide target. And what that means really is that states should kind of focus on where they have a comparative advantage, pick a handful, maybe 2 to 3 sectors, and build a credible investment pipeline, because once you can show investors more than just policy intent, but you can show them, parcels of land, you can show them clear utilities, then it moves from being, hey, come and invest someday to come and invest now. I think the second thing that we have seen is that where you make investing easy, that is a winning formula, and that's somewhat self-evident. But if you're able to have a single front door where all investors know that maybe you have an investment promotion office, investors coming in know that we can coordinate across ministries here, we can cut red tape, we have a very time-bound service, that signals seriousness. And I think the third thing is something that perhaps we struggle the most with, which is really in de-risking infrastructure. So it's all well and good to say we will offer different tax incentives, etc., but unless you really address the issues behind high costs, so where it's power, utilities, road access, then it does make it difficult to kind of convert that investment into something concrete. And I think lastly, alluding to what the Honourable Minister talked about, is that where you can have alignment with federal infrastructure corridors, whether it's ports or rail or power, then it's much easier because investors see coherence and they can see less risk. Now, in terms of what doesn't work so well, I think the first thing I would say is where you have a kind of build it and they will come mentality. So perhaps building an industrial park without an anchor tenant, an anchor client, without road, without water, without power, I think that does make it very difficult. And what states can end up with is perhaps an asset that's just a white elephant. I think similar to the point I alluded to, you can also have generic incentives. So where you say, we'll give you blanket tax holidays, again, that's all well and good, but we're not really addressing the root cause of some of their high operating costs. And the last thing as well is fragmented approvals. So you have to have an investor running around seeking signatures, trying to speak to this minister, this commissioner, that commissioner. It can make it very difficult. So I think I'll summarize kind of what doesn't work by saying that it's not enough to have promises, because what investors are buying is predictability. They want predictable costs, they want predictable rules, and they want predictable timelines as well. So I think in terms of the high level, I guess, things to think about when it comes to attracting investment, echoing what His Excellency said, pick your lane, pick where you have an advantage. As much as possible, publish an investable pipeline. And where possible, create an investment delivery unit, a one-stop shop that has the political authority to actually coordinate across the different ministries and agencies within the state, try to de-risk costs and not just the taxes, fix land and approvals as well. So try to leverage digital tools, try to perhaps set time limits to approvals. And I think the last thing is don't forget the human capital as well. So try to then also align where you have skills and training programs with the areas that you're focusing on. So, I mean, the words that I've shared are really sort of anchored in the experience that we have. Of course, you know, the governors that we have here seated will have a lot more hands-on experience. But from our experience, making your state investable, it's simple, but it's not easy. Meaning that you need to have focus, you need to have coordination, and you need to have credibility. So those are kind of my key thoughts.
Yeah. So now coming to Kaduna State, is Honorable Minister for Finance, right? Can you maybe tell us a bit about how this looks from your state? What sectors are you focusing on? How do you see your areas of competitive advantage?
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. In Kaduna State, we started actually by making some reforms that touch on development of the state generally. And part of what we did was the establishment of a gateway for investors. And that is KADIPA, Kaduna Investment Development Agency. That agency was created to serve as a gateway and to handhold incoming investors to whichever areas of investment they want to go into, so that we avoid some bureaucracies that investors face when they come to invest in states. So that agency will ensure that anything to do with probably land administration and getting all approvals, those companies that come for investments don't need to go to the various MDAs to seek for approvals. So they go through that particular agency and get their approvals. Now, the major areas or the potential areas that we have in Kaduna, like in most states in the northern part of the country, first is agriculture. Agriculture, we have over 4.6 million hectares of land that are arable and 2.3 currently under cultivation. And we have major producers of maize in Nigeria. We are major producers of ginger, and the best in the world. 60% of ginger production in Nigeria is done in Kaduna State. And again, we do tomato. We do partnerships with companies domestically and internationally to do these productions. And what Kaduna State decided to do, in order to support industrial production, we developed industrial zones. Currently in Kaduna State, we have 2 big industrial zones that have hundreds of hectares that are just ready. A kind of come with whatever you want to do, go in there. You have power, you have water, you have everything in those locations. Kaduna State has also signed and has done groundbreaking with SAPZ, with African Development Bank. It has been done, I think, about a month or 2 ago. So it has provided opportunities for investors when they come for production of agro-allied industries. Because the major production is agriculture, and if we want to add value, rather than just exporting these crops outside Nigeria, what we need to do is to begin to add value to such products. And that's the reason why we have decided to create that SAPZ, so that any agricultural production, product processing, any company wants to do, will just need to come in there, plug in whatever production they want to do, and add value either to the end of the consumer usage or maybe to the middle level and then export to outside this country. Again, we also have potential mining. Mining is also one of our potential. We have up to 25 solid minerals in Kaduna State. And we do partnerships also with many companies, both locally and internationally. And just like what the governor of Nasarawa State said, lithium is also available in Kaduna State. And we did the same. What we did, we got these processors from outside, but we insisted that processing must be done within Kaduna State. And they have been able to establish their company there in Kaduna, and they are currently processing lithium in the state. In terms of any kind of industrial production, you require power. Power must be available for anybody to be able to have smooth production. And we have 3 different power generation sources. We have 3 companies presently that are working towards production of power. And looking at the fact that there is need for renewable energy, we have 3 companies, major companies, that have come to Kaduna State. We have worked with them, and they are doing a lot to ensure that we give them the opportunity to produce that renewable energy, sources of energy. In Kaduna State, we used to have issues of security, which used to deter investors from coming to Kaduna State. Even though that kind of information is mostly being exaggerated. Even at the peak period of when security was seen as a challenge in Kaduna State, you cannot find more than 10-15% of the local governments of Kaduna State that were having such issues. But when you hear the stories from outside, it will be magnified as if each and every local government in Kaduna State was under siege. Fortunately, His Excellency, the Governor of Kaduna State, he decided to approach security issues differently. Not only looking at the kinetic approach, but we took the non-kinetic approach. And based on what has been done, I believe the issue of security may come, so that I don't need to deep into it. But what I want to say is that since security is a factor, and Kaduna State was one of the states that was being feared, people were scared of going there. I want to mention that about 2-3 weeks ago, the United Kingdom, on their scale of travel restrictions, which Kaduna State was placed on red alert, Kaduna State has downgraded to, or upgraded, so to speak, to amber, which means even the United Kingdom, after all analysis, have confirmed that Kaduna State is now safe for people to travel to. So if it is safe for people to travel to Kaduna State, which means it's safe to invest. And all these things have done not rely on the efforts or kinetic efforts coming from the federal government that we have to use the forces, but generally by utilization of non-kinetic approach. We realize that most of this banditry was taking place in certain locations, and the people doing such banditry were people that are within those societies. So what we did, we went to those communities, identified the leaders of those communities. We now confirm and they identified and informed us of their knowledge of the people that were committing such crimes. So we now made an arrangement whereby the leaders of those communities would have to meet with those bandits, come and make an arrangement whereby we can have peace between ourselves, and they tell us what actually they need. And we found out that, happily, that most of these criminals are even tired of what they are doing. They have amassed money, they cannot even spend it. They cannot even come to enjoy what we are enjoying in a free society. So there was that understanding that let them come, we sit with them, and when we started working, they even mentioned that they even need a plot of land to farm. And we were able to allocate plot of land to these people. They are farming, fertilizer will be provided, they have become friends of the leaders of those communities, and at the end of the day, peace is there. Local governments like Benangwali that you cannot even travel to. People travel to Benangwali even at 8 o'clock from Kaduna to go in there. So fundamentally, for investors, what they require in Kaduna State, like we have mentioned in terms of the raw materials are available, opportunities to come and establish factories in such industrial zones are available, and Kaduna State has over 10 million people, and those 10 million people are markets. They are people that can buy. So when you have population, you have market. And again, you have a lot of educational institutions that can produce labor from skilled to unskilled labor abundantly available in Kaduna State. So when you look at power is there, energy is there, raw materials are there, labor is there, security is there. So I will tell you honestly, hardly there is any place in Nigeria that one could go to invest beyond that Kaduna State. which has borders with 7 states and which used to serve as the headquarters of northern Nigeria generally. So I believe we need to see another way of partnership with the federal government, which I've always been seeing in terms of production, in terms of seeking for investments. There must be, like what the minister said, which I'm very happy to hear. Budgets are prepared at subnational levels, which in many instances don't even speak with the budgets at the national level. So when you see such situations, you realize that whatever you are doing at the lower level will not actually get the benefits of what we get from the federal level. If at the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, for example, certain things are planned to be done, we want to produce certain crops, we want to give emphasis on certain crops, then we need to identify the state that can produce those crops, see how we can be able to have collaborations and partnerships with them, and see at the end of the day, how do we measure that target we set for ourselves? Have we been able to achieve those targets that we have set from that federal level to the subnational levels? So if that is done, we now plan for the next season, and even if it is mining, what are the crops should we begin to do now, this year? Which crops should we take for 3, 4, 5 years? So that at the end of the day, instead of producing so many things and fill the market, we can be able to control the supply, and at the end of the day, control the prices.
But that's a good point. I actually will come back to you to talk about how better, because the coordination between federal budgets and even amongst other states, we will come back to that. So I want to go to the MD of Unilever. So from the private sector perspective, you guys are making investments. I know that there are several, at least a few manufacturing plants, and you're working on local supply chains. Can you talk to us a bit about what you're looking for when you're thinking about locating those investments? And are there certain initiatives that you're focusing on keying into now?
Thank you very much. Permit me to stand on existing protocols. I would start, first of all, on a lighter note. Myself and a colleague, when we were coming in, the first reaction we got was, Unilever, are you people still here? I thought you left. So I would like to use this platform to say, indeed, Unilever has been operating in Nigeria for just over 102 years. And we are in Nigeria for the long haul. Thank you. I think it's important we're having this conversation because when we reflect on prosperity of nations, it cannot be driven by just one region. It cannot be driven by just one source of prosperity. If I look at our sister company in India, and the Honorable Minister spoke about India earlier on, where the economy of India over time moved into what I would call regional prosperity. Different provinces playing to their strengths, just like Your Excellency, the Governor of Nasarawa said. Some on IT services, some on the automotive industry, some on agriculture, and at the end of the day, it built collective national prosperity. A lot has been said, even today, and I think what is really pivotal is how we bridge the gap between what we know and what we do. A lot of the challenges are known to all of us. We know the context, we know what the enablers are, infrastructure, we need power, we need logistics, interconnectivity on our roads, and everything else. But then how quickly we bridge that gap is that's where the difference is. We have made progress, as a country. I would say, for example, India has the National Single Window Program, which is a one-stop shop. Anything you want to do to invest in India, that window is connected to every single province. And we have something like that with the NIPC, which is doing a great job in terms of connecting also to investment promotion councils across the states. When there is predictive regulation, it helps with long-term planning. So for organizations like ours, we don't go into investments for short-term. It's the long game. The long game is what eventually justifies the level of investment that we put in. And as long as you're able to invest in places where regulatory stability and transparency is in place, you're able to see the improvement on your value chain, your cost to serve. And of course, you're also able to see how this fits into your market. Then it hits the sweet spot. Because when you look at Nigeria, Unilever, and we call it win in many Nigerias, Nigeria is not just about a particular state or a particular region. If you look at the industry we're in, which is fast-moving consumer goods, we have almost an equitable proportion in terms of contribution to turnover. Even some regions, if I would mention to you, are generating far more contribution to revenue, especially in the north, than you would see in other parts of the country. So what matters, therefore, is our ability to treat each part of the country, because our diversity is our greatest asset. Treat each part of the country as a unique market, find ways in which we can respond quickly to our consumers, to our customers. From Maiduguri is about 1,600 kilometers. Any country where industrialization is key, you would not build your setup on trucks flying 1,500 kilometers every time you want to get products across to your customers. So the opportunity, therefore, to invest, it's not just in manufacturing. It could be in redistribution, in distribution centers. It could be in terms of transportation clusters as well. And at the end of the day, it helps to bring back, the value addition. The last point I would mention is on the value chain. If you look at what we see across the country, it is clear that Nigeria is blessed, with lots of resources. We have cassava, we have sesame seeds, even in Nasarawa as well. We have ginger in Kaduna. And these are crops or commodities that are very important in production across the value chain. We talk a lot about cost of power, cost of logistics, which is very important. I'm not taking anything away from that. But what we don't often talk about is the cost of input materials for production processes, which is a far greater contributor than even the cost of distribution or the cost of actual production. The sooner we are able to process most of our input materials locally, the better competitive we would be.
Yeah, so I actually want to pick up on that. So agriculture and mining, but agriculture and mining is something that came up both in Nasarawa and in Kaduna. And, Mr. Adediyin is talking about how costly it can be to source those inputs. For an investor, if the investor sitting in the room thinking about setting up a processing plant, you have to think about what's going to be your inputs for that plant. There are several, I would say, public goods that needs to be created for agriculture, like storage facilities, irrigation, roads to market. Can you tell us what's happening in that space, right? If the investor's sitting in the room thinking about investment in agriculture in either of your states, and they're thinking, well, all those challenges, am I actually going to find enough, cashews to process for my processing facility? What are you guys doing currently to address some of those challenges? Yes, please, we can start with Nasarawa.
Okay, thank you. I thought you were starting with my Honorable Minister. The presentation by the Vice President captures that area. He mentioned about the importance of agriculture, but the importance of the fact that when we go into agriculture, we have to go into it from a sustainable point, not generally into agriculture. Technology he introduced, preservation, which is what you are talking is there. The dams that are being constructed all over the country are there for irrigation and power generation. The roads being constructed are there as infrastructure. You see, just like the last speaker actually mentioned, Nigeria is so blessed because you have the prospects. One, you have the markets. Nigeria is a very huge market. You have the people. So the number of people in Nigeria, there's over 200 billion people. is not a liability. It's actually more of an asset than a liability. So that is on one side. The second part of it, you have the materials. We were actually relying more on oil. I was looking at the sector contribution by, on the GDP for the second quarter. Oil only contributed 4%. You know who contributed more? Mining contributed more than oil. And you know overall oil? Agriculture contributed 26%. That is already 6 times what oil has contributed. So that's why taking oil seriously is something that every one of us has to take it from that angle. But before we do that as a subnational, you have to be able to develop your strategy. You know, you don't just go into it, just like my colleague from Kaduna has said, you know, we had to go from the point of having a company called Nasarawa Investment Agency, which is backed by law. You know, this company was established in order also to come up with so many other things. Every policy we bring that is going to attract investment into Nasarawa State, we try to back it by law. And the reason why we do that is because we don't know who are coming after us, whether they are going to be as serious and committed to investment as we are. So that's the reason why we actually back every, you know, in fact, Nasarawa is one of the 7 states, you know, that has qualified for what they call SABA. You know, SABA is what is being contributed by the World Bank to protect investment and to attract investment. So one of the things, we constructed a building known as multi-door courthouse. That's where if you are coming in for the ease of doing business, the day you arrive, you know, somebody is going to hand carry you into the entire process, from registration to land acquisition. And if there is going to be any kind of problem, you know, there is going to be a dispute resolution team that is going to also carry you through legally, you know, to back you all by that. So that's the reason why you see we go more and more into that. But in reality, for Nigeria, let us look at, I love the presentation, you know, earlier on, you know, by, sorry to keep going back to my younger brother boy, you know, when he presented about how did China do it, how did India do it, and how did Brazil do it? And I love the one for Brazil, because Brazil has so much in common, you know, with us. It was also having an economy of 246, similar to what we have. And in 20 years, they were able to achieve the $1.1 trillion economy. How did they do it? He listed some of those items. One of it, agriculture. You know, I was running the Dangote sugar refinery. Today, in Nigeria, we are consuming anywhere between 1.4 to 1.7 million tons of sugar annually. How many are we producing locally? 20%, if we are lucky. Some years, 10%. Some years, 5%. Because all these refineries are importing the raw sugar from Brazil and just refining. So the biggest producer was one of the companies I was running called Savannah Sugar. Savannah Sugar is sitting on 30,000 hectares of land, has only 7,000 hectares of land under cultivation. But do you know, during the period of production, when we are harvesting, we employ not less than 7,000 to 8,000 people in the area. So you can imagine by the time we have 30,000 hectares on the cane, how much we're going to do that. You can imagine by the time we are producing 1.5 million metric tons of sugar, how many people we are going to employ in this country, how much is going to develop to the economy. So that's why I say pick your area of competitiveness, understand it from that angle, provide the roads, provide security, you know, because you have to approach security. You know, we can't talk about security. You can't bring an investor and play around on the pages of newspaper security. You can't do that. This security has to be approached frontally, you know, and sincerely. Because the moment people are being kidnapped or so, you can't go giving excuses. You know, you have to be able to do it. The good news is that all the states, and in fact the Federation, are beginning to see improved revenue. We must use those revenues that we have in order to be able to attract this investment. And they must be sustainable investment. That's how I would conclude. So our coalition will be a coalition of ideas, coalition actually of commitment, coalition of this and not coalition of political parties.
Thank you. So on that note, let me go to Kaduna as well. Can you give us some specific examples of how how Kaduna State is making investments in the agriculture sector to improve those infrastructure challenges that have made it difficult for large commercial agribusiness to, like storage and road and irrigation and things like that?
Well, actually, we saw development in the state in two perspectives, because we had a choice of maybe wholly looking at that development on commercial perspective, that is looking at large-scale farms. But doing that will completely end away and exclude the smallholder farmers that form the major part of the society. So we want to see that in place. We are trying to develop the smallholder farmer and hold them to the extent that some of them will grow even to intermediate levels, and then some that cannot grow, just like what the is talking about, will have to drop and form of labor maybe to the bigger production process or to go to agro-allied industry. Now, in the area of the small farmers, we try to bring the concept of financial inclusion, which is one of the first things that His Excellency did when he became the governor of Kaduna State. He created the executive order on financial inclusion, trying to mobilize the excluded population, because he felt you cannot continue to develop when a major part of your groups are completely excluded, because there are issues when you do that. So by the time he started doing that kind of financial inclusion activity, so we tried to draw those people at the rural levels, the farmers, trying to see how we can be able to bring them to begin to open accounts, try to see how we can be able to give some funds for them to be able to buy some inputs, try to see how we can be able to relate with financial institutions that will provide access to finance to such people to begin to do agricultural production, to improve it from where they are. Because financial inclusion has been seen globally as one of the major tools that can bring people out of poverty. And His Excellency is using that at that level. And then we're trying to see big commercial farms to see how we can be, we support them with land. We do a lot of PPP arrangements to ensure that they now produce at that commercial quantity. And again, he decided to do rural infrastructure, providing roads for input to move and output to come out also. And because of this fragmentation of production, we had to do what we call aggregation, produce aggregation. And we have the companies that they have taken over most of the state's warehouses, where they will now be aggregating this agricultural produce from the rural population, and roads have already been provided for the movements to come in, and we put them in those locations. So once they are put in these warehouses, many things can be done. People that want to use them locally for manufacturing can pick from there. Export can also be picked from there. Again, when we come to probably mining, we also don't want to look at only the commercial mining production. We also look at the artisans. What do we do to improve the artisans? Because we don't want to displace them. Displacing these people is what in the past has been able to create this issue of banditry and criminal activities in the society. So we are doing these things consciously, trying to see how we can improve our economy, but inclusive efforts to be inclusive. All the people in the state to come together. Whatever you can do at your lower level, we support you. Whatever somebody can do at the higher level, we support you. So generally, that's what we are trying to do. But all the requirements of infrastructure at all the levels, we try to see what we can do to provide roads in terms of irrigation. Also, we have a company that we are talking to that have already started doing a lot of things on how we can be able to provide tractors that can work in the farms and also can produce power for irrigation.
So how, actually on that note, because you were talking before about different budgets being prepared without necessarily speaking to each other, I want to also come to the Honorable Minister for Economic Planning and Budget. I know you're not the Minister of Agriculture or the Minister of Mining, but since we've talked a lot about agriculture here and coordination and federal, I think Ms. Uchenna was talking about alignment with the federal government. I know that the federal government has been buying tractors. Kaduna is also talking about tractors. Like, are there particular initiatives at the federal government level that investors or the states should be thinking of keying into so there's no duplication and there's coordination? How are we thinking about it from that? How are we thinking about it from a national perspective?
Well, like I said, there's a quite often missed point because our constitution, even though recognizing 3 tiers of government, was very clear in section 13, saying that all those 3 tiers of government must work together because the functions are literally inseparable. A local government under the 4th schedule of the Constitution have responsibility for agriculture, for example. A state have, federal government have. So where one begins, so it's very difficult to clearly apportion responsibility. It requires complementarity. And as Boye did when he was trying to say this ambitious $1 trillion economy you want to create, he did mention 2 remarkable things. Yes, it's ambitious, we believe in it, we can, but it requires everyone to come together. So whether it is in agriculture, and he even said, which is true, that the industrialization that is an important element requires the produce of agric items to provide input. So if you like, even the $1 trillion challenge is a rallying call for all tiers of government to further see that there are opportunities. What is, I thought, is the focus, or somebody from the private sector in River, I think, is what is the missing link? Missing link, His Excellency the Governor have spoken about a World Bank program called SAVA and a federal government program called Presidential Ease of Doing Business, which underscores this point about deliberateness. Deliberateness, you have to be deliberate. And I recall that when I was a state governor, we went to Kaduna for a meeting of governors and the traditional rulers. And we were, His Excellency the Vice President was the chairman of the Nigerian Progressive Government. And that discussion arose, how can we invite people to talk to the governors of northern Nigeria and traditional rulers almost at the same time about those paradigm-shifting thought processes that we need to embrace in order to generate more investment. And incidentally, and as is very often the case with him, His Royal Highness, the Emir of Kano, told us that there was a lady that visited him before he left Kano for the meeting, who was doing some research sponsored by DPID of the United Kingdom on why private equity capital is not investing in northern Nigeria. And in his magnanimity and with the acceptance of the chairman of the forum, she was invited and she came. And the 3 outstanding things she said were that first you need to know who are the investors. Are they sovereign wealth fund, private equity fund, because you each require a particular skill set to even talk to. And she was in her emotion, she's a disciple. She said to us governors that we don't have a skill set to talk to the investors, but we have young ones in our states that we can train to have some skill sets, and they will be easier to communicate and market and bring them into, if it is investments that we are truly, if it is truly, and she said more than that, but I will stop there. but equally, again, so vis-a-vis the federal government, His Excellency, Mr. President, had actually had a meeting with state governors at the National Economic Council and said, look, tell me where you need me to support you more. And even our ward-based development program, which is a collaborative program, it's not a federal government program, it's a federation program. The governors approved it. It's a program which unites the three tiers of government in saying what are the economic potentials in each of the wards. What can we do to ensure that these 8,809 centers of prosperity, the uniqueness is appreciated and supported so that they all blossom? Thank you.
Let me bring in Ms. Uchenna again. I mean, so just listening to the conversation, your experience working with the states, are there any, now this round, we need to be quick. Are there any frameworks you think that we can improve on in terms of collaboration between the states to attract investment? Say, we're talking about agriculture, for example, it's common to Nasarawa and Kaduna and other northern states. Do you have any thoughts on frameworks for collaboration that could be improved on to attract bigger scale investors?
Thank you so much. I think, so firstly, it's really, like I said, it's very heartening to hear some of our experience echoed by His Excellency and also the Honorable Commissioner of Finance. I think I'll focus on this point of coordination to answer your question. So where I think that there are three main areas that states can focus on to really drive investment. The first being focus, which we've heard a lot around like prioritization, etc. Coordination being the second, and the third being like credibility. I think if both the governors, both His Excellency and also the Honorable Commissioner talked about CADIPA and NESIDA, right, having this one-stop shop. But I think a framework already exists essentially to promote regional, and that's our 6 geopolitical zones, right? So I think where you have either regional development commissions or particular states that have identified that among themselves they share competitive or comparative advantages, you can actually then sort of leverage that to whether it's create a critical mass around how you approach investors and around sort of who you want to talk to, how you want to develop the skill set within your states, plural, because that then obviously, helps to make things more targeted. So, like I said, I think that already exists. As far as we are able to better leverage it, there's already the SCDC, there's the there's the NDDC, there's a number of regional development commissions, and I think that taking advantage of them to not only sort of drive development at the state, but also sort of almost corral alignment with the federal level as well. So ensure that all the voices are heard and also that the federal is then being represented ably at the state level. I think that's a way, a very sort of straightforward framework that we can actually take advantage of from now.
And Mr. Adeni, a lot of what we're talking about, now just zoning in on agriculture again, states want to attract investment from a private sector investor perspective, and it doesn't have to be Unilever, just putting on that hat. In some parts, attracting investment is about communicating a clear vision, right? This is the vision. We're focusing on the agricultural sector. This is where the opportunities are. This is where we want you to invest. From your perspective, do you feel like you're hearing that from the different states or from Nigeria's federal government? And if not, do you have any advice for how to make that message crisper and so that we can cut through the noise to the investors who actually have money to invest?
Thank you. So I would say that yes, we are hearing that. Like I said, it's about the gap between what we know and what we do. So if I give a practical example, so if I take toothpaste as an example, toothpaste is, depending on who you talk to, maybe about $1 billion business in Nigeria in terms of size of market, so over ₦1 trillion. There is a material used in making toothpaste called sorbitol, which consists of, depending on each company, maybe about 50% of the formulation of making toothpaste. And you have a situation where, for a long time, everybody imports sorbitol. So we're talking an average of, let's say, 500 million naira being imported. We then took a step to say, look, let's take it back on the value chain. and we are not the subject matter experts. So we found an SME who was in the business of growing cassava and then was interested in processing. And we said, okay, fine. Most of sorbitol is imported from Asia, the Vietnams, the Thailands, and the likes, usually from tapioca. And then we realized you can get it from cassava as well. So we said, okay, let's make sure that if we want to process this, we are world class. It would not be a situation of we're just localizing for the sake of it. So they took time, sent their people to where these things were being manufactured, at a very pristine level, and were able to learn, bring back that skill, and were able to set up a processing plant in Oyo State, in partnership with Oyo State government and also the diplomatic community as well and development partners. And then we also brought in IITA. Again, when we talk about subject matter experts, to say, okay, even the cassava, how do you improve your yield better? And they were able to, with IITA's help, improve the yield by almost 50% per hectare for cassava, whilst we then partnered with them on saying, okay, the process of getting this out, of getting the sorbitol out, we will then, of course, commit to using that for our production. If we did that for every key value chain contributor across the industry, I guarantee you that at least probably about half of the $1 trillion economy boost we're looking for, we are able to get that, because that means that you're localizing it. Toothpaste, for example, we sell over 10 million tubes a month to Nigerians. Add also everybody in the industry. Likewise, in seasoning cubes, there are things like onion powder, cassava starch. These are items that very easily we could de-dollarize the purchase of these items, keep the investment in circulation within the country, and therefore help boost the economy of each of the states. So I do think that the states are speaking. I believe the Governors Forum also recently published, the State of States manual as well, which has been helpful. But then it is important that we then take action. And I would say that it does not have to be the conglomerates. Right. Even the states can partner with indigenes, send them to where, depending on the areas of strength, send them to where these things are being done at a world-class level, they learn, and then help in setting them up as well, to drive local production and processing. Okay, great. So, on that note, I think our time is up. So thank you to all the panelists for a great conversation. I think what I'm taking away, and it's jives with what I think Mr. Olusayan was saying earlier, agriculture, mining, these are opportunities that investors should be thinking about in your states and aligning with the federal government. So we'll look forward to seeing you continue to drive those growth in your states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Would ask you to please rise for a group photograph before you return to your seats. Mr. Chairman, sir, please join our panelists and our moderator on stage for this photograph. Thank you so much for the insightful conversations. Distinguished guests, immediately after this session, there will be 7 different lunch sessions in different rooms. In your brochures from pages 19, 20, and 22, you would see them all clearly highlighted and the different venues are written in. Whichever one speaks to you or your organization where you ought to be, please make your way down there. At 2:15, each session will resume in the respective rooms. We have Ogun and Nasarawa Hall, Borno and Anambra Hall, Kano Hall, Niger, Enugu, Benue. So we'd all split up into 7 different sessions. Lunch is served whilst the conversations go on. And at 4:15, we'll return here for the next plenary. Immediately after this session, please make your ways to the various sessions, as is our culture. Remember, if you have to take a break to leave somewhere else, join us via the NES virtual app, the NES virtual app. You can always click in there to see what's going on. At 4:15, we will start off. Someone is asking, should I go with my belongings? Yes, please. go with all items that are yours. And when you return, please come back with them as well. They are and they remain the property and responsibility of the owners. So hold on to your bags, your tags, your phones, your colleagues, and we'll see you back here at 4:15 after the various lunch sessions. Thank you.